point of view of astrologers, counseling people all the time, coming to them in crisis. So maybe each astrologer can say a few words, what's the most important thing, according to them, and then you can ask questions, okay? So I'm just a moderator.
Keep us under control. Well, I think there are basically two kinds of crises from a Jyotish Vedic astrology point of view, analytical point of view, which is basically, we have this system of what we call the dashas, so the planetary periods. So each planet gets so many years, and then within that there are sub-periods, and then within that there are sub-periods, and so forth. So, if you come to the period of a planet that is severely afflicted, that means, it's subject to very negative effects from other planets, or it itself is, usually it takes more than one thing. It's not just because it's Saturn, that's not the end of the world. But if there's a multiple conflict, sometimes in the chart, one house or one sign is particularly heavily afflicted. So when that gets activated, then it's serious crisis. Now the thing with the planetary cycles is because the sub-periods are also like a year or two, sometimes 3, then, it's not short term, it's significant length of time. So, if somebody gets sick, for example, at the beginning of one of these things, it may take a while to recover. You have to see. If somebody gets sick at the beginning of a major period, it could be chronic. It might go on for years. If it's the beginning of a sub-period, it's maybe months, something like that. So that's one thing. The other thing are transits. So the movement of the planets in the sky. So if some, Saturn or Mars or Rahu or something is crossing your ascendant or your moon, so then could be a short-term crisis, because generally transits are relatively short-term. But if it's a slow-moving planet, like Saturn or Rahu, Ketu, then it's, it's longer because they sort of build up and then there's a peak to the thing and then it passes. I remember one doctor came rushing to me once because his son was gone to the hospital with, a crisis. So I quickly looked at the chart and I saw that there was the Sun and Mars were both transiting the Lord of his 5th house, which represents children. So I saw immediately it must be a fever, because it's 2 hot planets. So yes, he was having a fever. And the Sun and Mars are not going to stay there long. It's just a day, 2 days, 3 days. Don't worry, a couple of days, everything will be fine. Of course, that's exactly what happened. So you can, this is basically from our point of view, there's these short-term crises due to the transits, and then there's longer-term crises which are due to the dashas. And then sometimes we're just born with some really heavy-duty karma, which can drag on even multiple periods. So, the job of the astrologer basically is to find out what the problem is, what the solution is, if there is a solution, and, try to help you overcome the difficulty.
When I think of the word crises, I think of a client calling me in a state where they're experiencing what we might call an emergent condition. They've got something going on that's a crisis for them. It's an extreme state. one of the things that they say in Vedic literature, for example, it's in Prashna Marga, it's very important that the mind of the astrologer and the mind of the client be somewhat in a quiet, unperturbed, undisturbed state. Now, if they're in crisis, that kind of state of mind is obviously very challenged. So what I'll do if I see the person's in crisis, often it'll be, oh, my husband broke up with me, or some kind of thing happened. If I can manage it, I like to wait just a little while to have them calm down a little bit. And then they're in a state of calmness, they can be more receptive to what you have to say. I remember when I first started doing astrology many years ago, I had a client call me up, and it was that condition where her husband had left her, and she was in such a state of disarray mentally, she couldn't hear a single thing I was saying because she was disturbed. So I told her, I didn't disregard what she was saying, but I said if you could wait a day or two so we could kind of let things settle down a little bit, then we can deal with your situation more comprehensively. I remember, the first time dealing with a very disturbed client, and there just was no listening. So you could say this, and then they would say, but, like this. So it created a very difficult situation to have a conversation with that person. So my strategy is often when people call me that they're in a crisis, then I'll ask if we could wait, a little bit for some calmness to be restored. Because again, the rule is that the astrologer has to be in a state of calmness for coherence, and then the client has to be in that state as well. And then if you can see a person, like I said in one of my lectures here, what Abraham Lincoln taught us in terms of Vedic astrology, he said, when he was addressing one of his troops during the Civil War, he said, we have to anticipate the approach of the enemy so that we can fortify ourselves against them. So as Andrew was mentioning, we have predictive astrology, the ability to do a statistical forecast, that looking at your transits, looking at your dashas, there is a tendency for perhaps yourself, your actions, your situation to be a little bit more delicate. You need to be careful not to engage in things that are overly challenging, stressful, or beyond your capacity. And to be very mindful, be very careful. I remember one client called me one time and they wanted to go hang gliding. And I said, let's just take a look at this before you go and do that. Otherwise, with you? No, they just wanted to go hang gliding for the first time. And they were adventuresome spirit, but I said, let's look at this. And this client, I had done a chart for them about 6 months ago and told them to get out of a business that they were in because their partner might abscond with the money, which he did, and he lost $40,000. So he was open to having a conversation with me about the feasibility of hang gliding, but he was very intent about doing hang gliding. So amazingly enough, on the day that he was going to do the hang gliding, it was an eclipse. And I said, if you want to go out and really mess yourself up, the exposure to danger is very, very high. So you ought to wait a little while. And so what was interesting is he went home that day pretty upset, but he knew that he had lost $40,000 just a few weeks ago. So he was open enough to believe astrology. So he thought, okay, I'm not going to go hang gliding today. So he was building a home up in Topanga Canyon in California. And he had one of these machines called a backhoe that digs a ditch. And he decided to work on his property a little bit instead of going to hang gliding. And he was on this backhoe on a little bit of an incline. The thing flipped over and landed right on top of him, but it landed in such a place that none of the equipment hit him. And that was the day that he was going to go hang gliding. So, obviously if he had not taken this advice, he would definitely be in a crisis. So we were dealing with anti-crisis situation. And so he said, okay, when's the next day that I could go hang gliding? After he tells me he nearly squashed himself with a backhoe. So I said, and he says, I got to go in 1 month sometime in 1 month, and that's just what I have to do. So I found the best day that I could find, and that's a problem too, is that people have a span of time they can work with, and it may not be the best time overall, so you're left with the challenge of finding the best span of time within that framework they have to deal with. So I found him this one time, and I said, you have to take off hang gliding before noon. You cannot take off after noon, or you very likely get hurt. So he's up there on the side of the mountain in Paris, California, on his first hang gliding thing, and he's waiting in line, waiting his turn, and obviously looking at his watch, and he goes, oh my God, it's noon, and I'm up next, And I told him, don't take off after noon, or you possibly hurt yourself. So he thought, I'm just going to take off. It was afternoon. So what happened, he took off, he told me this, he took off, the wind died. And so the hang glider dragged him about 50, 60 yards through the gravel and the dirt before the thing took off. Finally it took off. And he called me up and he says, it was a great experience. I nearly lost my leg, but it was really a great thing. So there's just some people that won't listen, or they'll listen up to a point. And one of your skills as an astrologer is to be able to assess, what's their readiness to hear. You give your advice, and if they're not ready to hear, then you can wish them well and hope it goes somewhat well from there. I won't go into all these, but there are many, many stories. I'm sure my 3 Guna friends here are. We're not the 3 tenors, we're the 3 Gunas. So that's my beginning story. So Sam, what might you add here?
Well, I'm still trying to get the thought out of my head of you hang gliding, not like
Not
that's,
me.
No, I know, but for some reason that just entered my mind. Not like that's a ridiculous thing, but for some reason he said he called me and wanted to go hang gliding, and I'm thinking,
Sure, why not?
I can see it. It's still there.
Yeah.
Well, obviously what Andrew and Bill both said, I have a lot of, all of it's reasonable and real. From what actually on my website, I even have a thing that says no emergencies. I mean, I'm kind of like, when people call you in a panic, it's not like I'm afraid I'm going to catch it, like I'm going to panic. It's just kind of like, really like Bill said, you really can't help them in that mode, because one of the things, they're too close to the story, and one of the things that astrology gives is perspective. Because I'm not in crisis with them. It's not my crisis. It's not my crisis, it's your problem. That's not the mentality. It's just that you realize, for one thing, you're going to waste their time and take their money if they're not able to actually have any kind of dispassion. Because, like Bill said, they're not going to do what you tell them, or they're not like the astrologer's job is to tell them what to do. That's not how I approach it anyway. But they don't have the necessary distance at that time, maybe. So it's really good to, when I've dealt with those things, I actually just kind of say, now isn't the time. Just, you need to, calm down and, do your spiritual practices. And I assume they do them. That's just sort of called assuming, as well as guiding. Not saying do your spiritual practices, but it's like, I'm sure you have some way to get some dispassion at the moment, and then, we can see what, when things calm down, because then it's just not going to be useful. Because what's going to happen when you do those kinds of readings is the people, they just keep reaffirming their fears. Like you talk and you're like, well, at this time, things could change. Yeah, but, and they just keep driving you down the same road to their paranoid conclusion and what they're afraid of. It's just an hour and a half of like arm wrestling when they're just not in a receptive state often. So that's the acute moment, you would say. But once it becomes possible to help them, I just fall back on the universal principles of astrology and of life, really, which is whatever their planetary cycle is, or whatever the acute thing is, like if it's a Saturn transit over their moon, or if it's, which is going to be longer, or if it's a Mars dasha and getting activated by transit and whatnot. If let's say that Mars is the planet that's really doing it, okay? rather than also get so hooked into this crisis of the moment, explaining a larger perspective, like what is the divine quality of Mars? What is the real soul lesson that this thing is that you're so tangled up in right now because you've lost your dispassion. You're totally attached to this thing, to this outcome that you're afraid of or that's going on, and you're not seeing the bigger picture. You're like encased in tamas, to talk about the three gunas. Some ignorance has you totally attached to this outcome. And of course you don't say it like that, but as an astrologer you already hold this perspective. And you know that they need an understanding that they're not capable of at the moment because they're too involved, like we all are. I'm not saying they, like it never happens to me. So whatever the divine purpose is of that planet, like for Saturn, for instance, Saturn gives us the capacity to endure hardship and to thrive in solitude and to make a commitment to things that are based on the real truth of life, rather than run from those things in a kind of immature way, and then eventually that thing catches up with us and we have to deal with it in this painful moment. So explaining the process of what that planet really is, the one that has them so upset at that moment, and it could be Venus, it could be Jupiter, it could be misuse of the senses, it could be believing in things that are wrong, which would be a Jupiter problem, it could be any of the planets. They can all be a catalyst for difficulty. But explaining the divine purpose of that energy in them. It's not something outside, it's something in them. All the planetary forces and the astrological forces are forces in our mind and consciousness. And they're experiencing it at that moment as this acute emotional problem and attachment. So you take it from that level and elevate it. And they'll recognize it. They'll recognize that divine part of themselves that's getting occluded by the ignorance of the ego. And it'll comfort them at that time, at least, to realize, okay, this is a problem, and that came from this mistake. And so, I really try to talk up to my clients as far as talk up to the big part in them. That's one of the things I love about Swami Shivananda's teachings. Is Swami Shivananda is really talking up to us, like he's talking to that big Paramatman in everybody. He's like, don't die here like a worm, roar like a lion of Vedanta. He's like saying you're the glorious Atman, and you're like tangled up in this thing right now, and I get it, I understand, but here's really what the thing is. And this is where this energy has gotten off. And then you provide a structure. One of the things that's very comforting to people in crisis is that it's not going to last forever, right? So you give them a time, a realistic time, and maybe a framework how it's going to change. And how it's not going to feel as bad as it is right now, but it might be worse next week, but I'm just letting you know, or, things like that. There's all, you try to be reasonable with the person after you put the problem in a greater structure that's bigger than just their problem of the moment, if that makes sense. And try to reorient them toward the love in their heart, the thing that they've abandoned because of this attachment, because really, we all want to live a life of meaning based on the thing we love so much, wanting to create that, wanting that to be what, fuels every moment. And they're obviously not doing that when they're in that crisis. So you find something that is actually their true, heart resonance. Look, you're really an artist. Go paint a picture about it. Or I don't know, try to find the thing to channel their creativity into something other than this, if that's possible. So it's hard to just say crisis because there's so many different possibilities, but that's what I would say as a place of origin.
Thank you very much. So now we would ask you to ask questions to the three gunas.
So which guna are we? Swamini, which guna?
It's ever-changing.
Okay.
So I just found out that I have
You need to raise your hand.
Oh,
Give
she
you
did.
permission.
She did. Oh, we got it.
I didn't give you permission.
Swamini's the moderator.
Yeah, I'm the moderator.
She's,
Now you can talk.
So I just found out that I have the Rahu Venus in my sun, which is Aquarius, which I just feels a lot of agitation in the interpersonal ground. So I was looking at what Venus remedies there would be.
Venus, Sun, and Rahu in Aquarius.
Yeah.
And what, you know what house it's in?
In the in an 8th house, and then Jupiter and Moon in Libra's house.
All right.
So basically Venus is dealing with Rahu.
So is there a question? Was it a remedy about
Yeah, about remedies.
about Venus Rahu?
Yeah, Venus Rahu. So that's
Somewhere in the scriptures it says you'll be haunted by witches. Is that true? I have it too, by the way. I have it in the Ascendant, and it is true.
I've given a lot of power and energy to my life. Is that the wrong question I asked?
No, it's your question. That's what's great about it. So, Sun, Venus, and Rahu in Aquarius in the 8th house? Is that what you're saying? If that's the case, you know, what I like to do is look at a situation in terms of how can we find the most favorable, the most beneficial way of dealing with that, and then also to understand what is it about that condition or situation or combination of planets in your chart that you need to be careful about. So, you know, you have in the 8th house, you know, we can call that the house of vulnerability on one side. On the other side, we can call it a house of support. So if we want to find something beneficial about those arrangement of planets, if we're looking at Venus, which represents love and energy, females or female-like energy, we would want to make sure that we develop our discernment in terms of assessing whether that person we may be interacting with that represents that female or Venus energy is capable and interested in supporting ourselves. Rahu can bring confusion and lack of clarity or discernment. And so what we would want to do is if I feel you know, a certain situation come up, a Venus related, you know, with women or feminine or partnership kind of things, I would want to be very careful that that person is somewhat equally invested in the relationship as you would be, or that you are as equally invested in it as they are. So there's some, you know, balance and some compatibility there, so the thing is sustainable. Otherwise, you know, the Sun and Rahu can be very confusing. Venus and Rahu can be confusing. So it would be, you know, what level of clarity, understanding can you bring into the situation so that you're less exposed to the kind of confusion and difficulties that combination, you know, could potentially cause. You know, having a way of dealing with it and acting with it and saving yourself, you know, being proactive or in that kind of way.
Another question?
I'll just say one word, which is that those who came to my lecture earlier, we talked about how Venus can get disturbed easily by you know, other influences. Rahu is probably the worst. So then something needs to be done, because otherwise your basically relationships get disturbed. Mainly your relationships, but it also comforts. And, you know, Venus rules over a lot of things that are really important. And so it's good to do something. You know, if you do have a couple, especially two malefics impacting your Venus, then and you want to have a better experience of life, then from the point of view of Vedic astrology, it's good to do something about it. Some sadhana. I mean, what I prescribe is a sadhana. That's what I've been taught. Because it's all very well, you can be philosophical about it, but that's just, you know, coping with the situation. Trying to improve it, but, you know, the idea of actually remedying it the normal thing in Vedic astrology is actually to do some, what we call upaya, some kind of you need to do some serious remedy for such things. So there's a real discipline involved, because Venus is your purity. So the process of the cleaning, there's a serious cleaning that goes on. There's a purification process that removing that disturbance. So one has to go through that. And normally it's fine, but there may be some little bit ups and downs in the process. Because it's some actual cleansing. It's like, I don't know, some of you have done perhaps the Panchakaram or something. There's physical cleansing. And then there's a kind of mental or psychic cleansing, which comes through the, mental practices, mantra practices. So that's the classical Jyotish.
I'll be talking about Venus tomorrow morning. So it's on Venus.
But this sort of thing you need to be properly initiated into. One wants to do it.
I have the same, and I actually do a lot of Lalita Sahasranam, which is a chants to the Divine Mother. It's pretty standard. It's going to elevate Venus energy. You can always elevate, like I said, any problem, like Andrew was saying, can be purified by connecting with its pure form, sort of devata form, especially any kind of mantra. Mantra is the great eye that we do ourselves. We can all say mantra because it purifies the space, the akash, that purifies the air, which is our thoughts and mind, that purifies the fire, which is our actions, that purifies the water, which is the feeling, and that purifies the body and your presence, which is the earth. So mantra is the great upaya that we can all do. We can also get, yagyas and have priests say mantras on our behalf and fire ceremonies and stuff, but you can say mantras yourself too. And most of the time when we have a guru or some lineage, we're initiated into that mantra. Hopefully their intuition is keen enough to initiate us into the proper mantra. Usually they ask us which form of God we love the most. Kind of what I said before, like, have your heart resonating with what you love. If you love Shiva, the Shiva mantra would probably be good. And so often that Rahu Venus is going to create a lot of passion and desire, and you'll have a tendency toward those nice sweet devis, those nice sweet goddess energies. So you'll usually like to say those mantras as an example. So that's just a general thing to
Sam and I are both very fond of the Lalita Sahasranam. And we both have this tendency to love the goddess. But I just want to make a small distinction between those things that you have a natural tendency towards, that form of God that you naturally love, which is one thing, and the form that you practice for a remedy. Because you may be remedying something which is not connected to your natural form of God that you worship. If you see what I mean. Because, in the chart we look at certain things, like, for example, the Lord of the 5th house. And I talked about other things earlier. So, for what your Ishta, what the sort of form of God you love, but you may have a specific problem which is not connected to that, and therefore you actually have to do what we would call a remedy. So remedies are not always connected to the form of God that you're naturally inclined towards. So, that's this little distinction I wanted to make. But of course, in this case, it's all about Venus, so the goddess.
And the other thing too is that you can have your sadhana, like, it's also the difference between a sadhana and like a remedy in the moment. Like, for instance, your sadhana could be like saying the Lalita Sahasranam as an example, because you love that thing. But then you may need to do a remedy in addition to your sadhana for a difficult problem. It doesn't mean you stop your sadhana, which would be like saying the practice, like doing the practice.
You won't stop your whatever the program of the ashram or something. That's all there, first priority.
Right.
So when I say the word sadhana, it's in the context of what Swamiji taught this morning.
Yeah.
you know, it's a disciplined thing. So like the person will be asked to, you know, do something at a certain time for a certain number of days, you know, with a certain number of, you know, rounds of repetitions, that sort of thing becomes a sadhana because of rules. And if you skip a day, or basically you have to start over.
And that's kind of sadhana as a remedy. There's also the sadhana that you just do every day, like people have their sadhana, like, and that's a different way to say it too.
Yeah, that's they're all sadhanas.
Yeah.
Anything done in a systematic, disciplined thing.
The sadhana that you love, like the
sadhana.
sadhana that I do every day is like the Lalita Sahasranama. And then at some times, like right now, I personally have Sadhisati, like Saturn going over my moon, so there's other things that I would maybe do in addition to that, but it doesn't mean I stop doing my sadhana, which is a thing that I love that connects me with that thing. So then you have these other moments where, you know, Mars is going to go through your first house, so you might, for, you know, that 6 weeks or something, do something to kind of remedy Mars at the same time, and it doesn't mean you stop your sadhana, like your bhakti devotional practice, for an example. So,
yeah.
How you would say, like, to the person who disbelieves in anything? Like,
that's tough, because that's what usually happens. Because we're talking about all this sadhana for people to do, and it's like if you get people to do anything, it's a miracle.
Yeah, I mean, we're only because you are the sort of people who might do sadhana. Otherwise, you can't. What can you do?
This is one of the things that I do a lot. I did a class not too long ago about, especially Westerners, say the Lalita Sahasranama, but people aren't going to do it. They don't know how to say this stuff. It's strange. You have to find ways to, and this is one of the things that I did. I did a whole webinar on it, where I was talking about alternative ways to activate the energies of planets. Like for instance, Venus Rahu or something like that. It's the same energy. The energy is about, bringing beauty into your life, embracing beauty in a healthy way without it being exploitive or getting more tamasic and then ultimately painful. Because when we take something for ourselves, it becomes painful eventually. So any kind of difficulty winds up being through selfishness on some level. So finding a way to give that thing more. You have these remedies in India, which is like, give a white flower to a nun on Friday, and stuff like, or on Thursday, these kinds of things. Or these sort of obscure ways, but finding normal ways to bring that energy into your life is just as important as some bewildering mantra that nobody's going to say. They just won't do it usually. So, lighting incense, bringing beauty into your life. Like when you see a planet is really weak, or it's really painful, like let's say Venus aspected by Saturn or something like that, where the experience of that planet has not been enjoyable, or maybe the person has been exploited through it. Maybe there was some kind of abuse or something like that. So their connection with that energy is a very painful thing for them. So they kind of avoid it, it becomes compartmentalized, and they can't enjoy life, like for instance, which is the Venus problem. Finding ways to bring that into their life, surround themselves with beauty, with flowers, with color, because you often see people will model that. They'll be in dark, and they'll be like, they'll be fearful. So you tell this person to say the Lalita Sahasranama, and they're like, yeah, whatever. You try to find something reasonable and normal. So that's why you need to understand the nature of what the planets really activate, not just those kind of traditional Indian remedies. I'm sure the rishis would say the same thing if they were alive.
There's sort of levels to it. So if the darkness is great, even a tiny spark of light makes a big difference.
I think one of your skills as an astrologer is to be able to assess your client's readiness for change. How ready are they? And that's a skill that you have to assess. So I actually sometimes will ask my clients 3 simple questions as what I would call a readiness review, their readiness to change. One is to ask, do you think that change is possible? They should answer yes to that. The second question I'll ask, do you think you can change? And they should answer yes to that as well. And then I ask them, do you think you could change starting now? And they should answer yes to that. So the way that they answer those questions, 3 simple questions like that, can give you a lot of insight into whether, I just want to take a magic pill and, get rid of this all the way. I don't really want to do anything. Well, I want you to take it away when you read my chart. So
That's what happens.
So you
What
have
gem
to-
do I wear to make it go away?
Right,
You know?
I don't want to really do any work, but you just, do your magic stuff as an astrologer. My friend told me you could read my chart and get rid of my problem. So you want to set those expectations correctly with them, and then if they're open and honest, like my fellow gunas here have said, you want to take them from that level of readiness and then move them forward. So maybe they are advanced enough to take a Lalita Sahasranam, or maybe they just need to do the Upaya or the Shanti, like Sam said, of doing something simple like, be nice to your wife for a week.
I was asking what their
the
sign
rest of your
is.
life,
Yeah.
Ask them what their practices already are, like what they already do.
Yeah, this you have to.
If they have it, you have to know.
Because you can't, if some people just have some fixed practice and they won't do anything else, maybe their guru doesn't even allow them to do something else, or they have some philosophical objection. So you can't override that. So you have to see what they're doing and what their situation is, and what's possible, and what religion, if there's sometimes people like, you have to think, if they're strictly Muslim or Christian or Buddhist or something, you have to find something inside the context of what they're willing to do.
And it's also the same sadhanas happen, and they're really all from yoga. You really recommend them do some kind of yoga on some level, like some form of yoga. You need to be more disciplined. You need to do bhakti yoga. Something.
If the problem of
Microphone.
Venus is a question of the 8th house,
in yoga, there is one practice, which is a practice of replacement with the opposite. So that is a practice of in Raja Yoga advice. If you have a problem and you identify the nature of the problem, you just have to replace it with the opposite. So if this is a case of, like you say, confusion in love or desire that create the confusion, then one just have to replace with the opposite, which is what you said, Andrew, to purify the Venus. The sun involves, or the ego is there too. To purify the Venus, which is the desire, and the ego, which is to replace with the opposite. That means purify and replace the opposite. That means replacing, like you said, with pure love, devotional love. So it's sublimated.
Simple beauty that you don't want.
Sublimate that love that somehow get corrupted. So to become pure love. Purify the ego means to either sublimate the idea of self, the big S, self, or to, the simple way in yoga, purify the ego is to do karma yoga.
Yeah, service, the other big S.
To do service.
Yeah.
The best is to do service to your wife.
Exactly.
Yeah?
You have to do service to whoever is represented by the problem.
By the Venus.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Venus is very much about service anyway. It's very much about devotion. It's very easily devoted.
I think that's one of the most powerful things that I sometimes call it replacement therapy. You replace that negative condition with some counteracting positive condition. And I know Patanjali says that when the mind is afflicted by an adverse condition, think of the opposite. I remember when I was a little boy, and as little boys do, sometimes you imagine there's a monster in your closet or under your bed or something like that. I remember I was like maybe 6 years old, and I'd go to bed and I'd start thinking about this monster under my bed. And then, for some reason or other, I thought, no, I'm going to think about Santa Claus. And so I would have that image. I would have that image of Santa Claus and joy and family happiness and all that stuff. And I would think on that for as long as I could, and then I would fall asleep. But there's a saying, that if you're stuck at a bus stop in the snow in Minnesota, you should be thinking about a sunny day on the beach in Hawaii. So you want to think of the opposite and, change that condition within you. So it's a very, very powerful technique. I agree with Swamiji that it's one of the most powerful things you can do. It's overly simple in our thinking, but very, very good. It's one of the most significant things you can do.
Thank you. Anybody else? Raise hand.
I was born in South Africa pre-apartheid. Like the hospital I was born in doesn't exist anymore, and my family doesn't have a birth certificate, so nobody knows what time I was born.
Right.
I can never get an accurate reading, can I?
Oh, well, that's not so difficult.
Because even when I got one here, and we started the reading on one, and then we read the other one, and they both fit really well, and so it almost confused me even more, because I'm just totally confused at this point. I don't know.
Yeah, my friend, I was in South Africa, and this lady, she said, oh, the hospital's still there, I'm going to find out. But unfortunately, when she went to the hospital, they said, well, why do you want your birth time? It's astrology, isn't it? And then they completely refused to come up with the documents because they were Christian and objected. So I appreciate the problem.
Well, I went to the House of Records. I dragged my biological files. Like, you're taking me, said I won't go there. It's full of, no, it's not our place anymore. You're taking me. I want to know my birth time. He took me down and said it just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
None of it exists anymore.
I know, after a certain number of years. So, I mean, you do have to rely on rectification.
So you can rectify the chart?
Yeah, I mean, everything should work, click, 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 according to, as long as you've had some events in your life. It should work, click, click. So, a little bit of work, someone has to work on that. Check it. It takes a bit of time.
Okay.
I have a question. So I'm in the medical field, and I wonder when women have cesareans and they pick the day that they're, set in this process of being born, and it's not, to me, not controllable.
It's really funny. At dinner, I just related a little story, a quick story that happened to me a few years ago, where someone that they wanted me to have a debate with another astrologer on the phone about what time they should have the baby cut out of the mother's stomach. I'm not comfortable doing it anymore. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, frankly. I've done it a couple times. I think if you can, I mean, it's not like I think there's anything inherently wrong with it, because people are going to get a cesarean and they have a window of time. The example that I cite, though, is an example of it gone way too far. And not because the people were so concerned about the baby, but they actually wanted to, well, I'll just say, they actually were, it seemed like their main concern was what baby is going to, bring the family the most money. You wouldn't believe it. I mean, really, it was really... When the motives are like that, I actually didn't realize that was the angle when I agreed to do it. So I took the money and then I just donated. I didn't want anything to do with part of the thing, really. But beyond something like that, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, per se, but it's, I don't know.
But does it mess up your being this child, this person, being?
No, here's the thing. I understand. Let's just say this really quickly. There's a whole lot of things. The will of the being is going to incarnate when it does. We have all this backstory of, an astrologer picked it, so you really didn't. It wasn't really the will of that being. It was the will of that being. It always comes out at the time it's supposed to, even though we look like we're having this sort of play. Because people say, well, I was supposed to be born at this time, but I was early and cesarean and this. So does that count? It all counts. Whenever you come out, that's when it counts. Exactly. What other people talk.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
somehow it happens.
Right.
The destiny forces itself.
Yeah, the will of the being comes. We're kind of a player in that. So
I had a client that bought an atomic watch so he could get the time exactly right. He got a high-tech video camera with a clock on it. And he was all ready to go. And the whole birth process started. he got so excited he forgot to look at his watch and turn on the camera. And it was 2 or 3 minutes later, and he, oh my God, you know, and so he knows his baby's time probably within 2 or 3 minutes, but he was so perturbed that he'd spent all this time preparing to get the exact time. And
yeah, and actually it's the other thing, a couple of times that I did do that people followed up with me where we did find a good muhurta, and it didn't happen at that time anyway.
Right.
You get to the hospital and you can't say, okay, at 12:25, yeah, I actually gave him a window of about 10 minutes where, you know, but it was actually within the window where there was a really good ascendant. It was still a good muhurta, but not exact. So, yeah, I mean, it could have, anything can happen. But
Yeah, I had to do this recently, and I refused to go into Navamshas. I said this is a good lagna. Anyway, what I did is I looked at the mother's chart, and I saw what the lagna was going to be. Basically, I mean, which was actually the destiny. Because that struck me as, I mean, that's the key thing. So I was studying mainly the mother's chart, but also the father's chart, and seeing what their next child was meant to be. And then, you know, checking up the reasonable lagna, and then
yeah, that's
he had some couple of hours, and then beyond, he said, what about, you know, narrowing it down? I said no.
And the hospital, because it's an efficient organization, is going to take the time that they have. So something could have happened in the previous birth in that operating room.
Exactly.
Where the time was compressed, they had an extra half hour, and the doctor didn't want to wait around.
You can't force the doctor down to 5 minutes,
Yeah.
unless you're a multi-millionaire.
Yeah.
Private hospital.
and you tell them, this is for astrology. This you
Yeah.
gotta get this right because my astrologer says
It's the future president of the United States.
incarnation.
You got to get this right.
Well, there's this wonderful story, I don't know if you know the story, about Ravana. You know Ravana? The demon who stole Lord Rama's wife. And yeah, so he had conquered all of the 9 grahas, the planets, and he'd forced them to lie down under his foot, you know, below his throne. So he had them all under control. And then he was due to have a son. So he understood that if all the planets went into the 11th house, then his son would be invincible. You know the story? So, so he just ordered them. You know, they were all under his control. He said, okay, everybody in the 11th house. So they were all shaking and standing there. And, but then you see the birth starts, he gets a little distracted. The moment he puts his attention over there, Shani puts 1 foot in the 12th house. Suddenly he sees this is what's happening, so he chops the foot off, which is how Shani got to be lame. Shani is said to be lame. I mean, it's to do with moving slowly in the sky. Poor guy is just hobbling along. But, you know, that meant that the sun was not invincible, someone could kill him, because it was just a little bit of the 12th house. So the whole point of the story, of course, is to tell everybody that it doesn't matter who you are, you cannot cheat fate. There will always be something that you couldn't fix. I mean, that's why the rishis wrote the stories. So this is it. We try a little bit. Like I had to fix the beginning of some corporate venture, you know, which is always a thing, because you know, you can't get everything perfect. And then the problem is the destiny of the founder. Like, I got him a pretty good time, and there was only one weakness I couldn't get rid of. I mean, it's pretty hard to get it down to one weakness. Normally, any moment in time has multiple weaknesses. Unfortunately, when that weakness came along in the dashas, it also coincided with a downturn in his chart. So, you know, the local government suddenly decided they didn't like his project. It all became a problem. So, you know, it's just very hard. You just can't stop the destiny. You know, so you just try. And then what's left, you say, okay, do this remedy, try this. But you know, you can't.
Appreciate.
I just had a quick question about births and which time we use, so the first breath of the baby. Is that?
I have, according to my readings in Parashara, he says in the Kali Yuga, you take the time that the baby is separated from the womb, all the way out. And so I've talked to a number of operating room nurses and doctors, and depending on the hospital, they have a lot of equipment to register, the birth time. But the last doctor I talked to, she told me that they have, even a video camera in the operating room with a clock and a timer, and when the baby is fully parted from the mother, that's when they register the time of birth, in a modern hospital in the United States, according to that person I had talked to. So, there's different things, crown of the head, cutting of the cord, all that stuff. But, yeah. And, people, again, this is an area of scholarly debate, but I think what you get from most hospitals is that point of parting from the mother and registering the time of that. And even then, people say, well, I've got it exactly in my birth certificate. And if they don't have some of this modern equipment, like I talked to, the operating room nurse, the head nurse, they finish the delivery, and then she's supposed to write it down. She goes, wait a minute, was that 9:25 or 9:26? And then she could write down the wrong time. So there's a lot of variables.
Yeah, you also don't cheat that fate either when it comes down to it, what fate winds up on the birth certificate, or whether you can't find a birth certificate, or what it's, we talk about what it should be, and there are conflicting reports of when it should be, like in the scriptures, and ultimately when we as astrologers, one of the first things that you do is you look and you see it, if it's like 8 o'clock, it's probably not really accurate, because most people aren't born right on the hour, so you always rectify a little bit. At least I do. I always look, at least I ask how, was this in the birth certificate? And even then, when you start to do something, even if it's like 8:15 or 8:13 or something that looks like it's good, you can tell once you start looking, and especially in the harmonic charts, and you start talking about their life, you might have to move it over a little bit here and there. Often this is just to correct for other little variables in astrology which are not exactly accurate. So we can also nitpick over seconds here and there, but other little calculations like exactly what the Ayanamsha is, because it's a little off here and there. So it doesn't mean, like when people say, this astrologer said it was that, this one said that, and they think it's actually a big deal. It's not. Every astrologer is going to work. They're using like their Ayanamsha based on the way they work. And so these little movements here and there are to know that we're working with the accurate time. And it renders a lot of that stuff actually moot at some point, frankly.
That's so true. I think Andrew might be able to validate this, but I think sometimes the way the programmer programs the astrology program will have some way bearing on how some of these time elements are calculated. So in my perspective, there'll be situations where a person is trying to correct the birth time, but they're actually also having to compensate or adjust for some variability.
The calculation of the Ayanamsha.
Yeah, and software programming. So, people have this idea that everything is extremely exact, but it's as exact as it can be. And different people, in my experience, have different karma about this. Some people have the karma to have their chart read really clearly. And other people's karma is like, wow, that
people that incarnate between two ascendants, or the
hard
chart, it's their will as well.
Yeah.
And that whole thing about once the astrologer gets it and they move the time around, they know that they're working with a chart that is accurate. It's not even hard to see at some point once you know the way the Navamsha should look if you had this marriage. It really snaps into place. Those points kind of go away.
I know this happens to me just from having done so many charts. I'll look at a chart, and after a couple conversations, a couple sentences with the client, I'll say, this time's not right.
Totally.
Just like right off, I just can't even speak to this time you gave me. Something's not right.
Anytime something's within 5, even like 5 or 10, at least about 5 degrees of any Rashi, I always always check to see if it's the next
do
one,
too.
because there's no way that they're always right. So many times they're wrong.
Yeah,
Because especially if they're late, because I think hospital rooms especially if it's very early in the next sign, because I think hospital times tend to be late. Like, because they're in the chaos of a childbirth, they're going like this, and then they're like, oh, what time is it now? 10 minutes after, and like, oh, 12:05, they write it down, but the baby has been out for 5 minutes, maybe, and then they write the time down. I think this may happen. So I think times tend to be later than earlier, what I've noticed.
How much degrees does it change in 5 minutes?
It can change. It changes like
It's about 1 degree every 4
every
minutes.
4 minutes.
it's about 1 degree every 4 minutes. Yeah.
4 days of dasa time, right? For every minute or so, clock time.
It depends which dasha.
Yeah, so if it's right on the edge like that, 5 minutes more or less.
Whether it's Venus or Sun.
But it's not unusual to see.
But the thing
15
is, you
minutes
see,
on.
the difficulty with rectification is that things don't necessarily happen on the day the dasha period starts, or even the moment, like, a transit occurs. You can't guarantee that it's going to happen on that day. So just adjusting everything to fit to a particular day, may be just an illusion.
I use the analogy, you go into a cold room and you turn on the heater. Well, you've started the heating process, but you may not feel that for 25 minutes, depending on how cold it is, but the heater was turned on 15 minutes ago. So there's the lag time, especially when you get these slower moving outer planets, you can even start, it's like going towards the beach, you can smell the salt air and feel the cool air. You're not at the beach, but you can start to feel the influences of it. So some of these things can start to appear a little bit earlier before the time.
One of the,
Want to continue the same question?
Another question about size. We're talking about crisis and counseling people, so I'm just curious, with all the years that you've been doing readings, which is so much more than probably most of us, what percentage of the clients would you say come to you inside XIT? Reach out to you because they're in a Saturn?
seems to happen a lot, but I don't know, I've never worked out what the percentage is.
It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I will watch Saturn's transit not only over the moon, I'll watch it over the rising sign, over the sun, because it impacts all of them. And you'll find what's really difficult is someone has, like moon in Leo and Lagna in Libra and, sun in Scorpio, where they got everything in a big trail, so they've got a lot of deals to work on year after year after year as Saturn, moves all the way through that. I myself have often found that people who are very pitta, very fiery, what I think, this is not a personal opinion, but I think what they ask for before they come into this lifetime, they say, give me all my karma straight up, give it to me really hard and quick, and let me get over it really quick. I don't want to mess around with this stuff. Thing is, they get born and they forget they asked for that.
Yeah. Oh my God, this is too much too quickly. Exactly.
I can't handle this. What's going on?
Yeah, it's common.
And then they pass through that period of extreme, and then it does calm down. But they go, "Wow, what the world is going on here?"
Yeah, I'm not sure how many have Sadhisati. I don't know if I'd pay that much attention to that particular thing, but I definitely always know where Saturn is, and I agree with Bill, although I would even add, anytime Shani is going over any natal planet, you're going to feel the pressure relative to that planet. That's what Saturn is. Saturn goes over Venus, and you're going to feel the consequences of how you're using Venus energy. That's really what Saturn is. It's the truth of how, it's really just the truth of existence, the pressure and the weight of truth and the weight of time. And anytime he goes over any natal planet, you're going to feel the weight of time pressuring that aspect of you. And if it's something that you're intelligent with, then there'll be a great reward, because then the reward of your intelligence will really kind of manifest and tend to manifest if the dashas line up and whatnot. But you'll feel a great kind of capacity to let go of something that's not moving that thing forward. As an example, if you've been misusing it, then someone might let go of you because you're not using that thing so well, as an example. So Saturn's always going to bring pressure no matter what he goes over. And also the other thing that I think needs to be really said is that aspects by transit are really important. Like right now, Saturn just went into Libra, but he's aspecting Cancer and he's aspecting Sagittarius. And that drishti of Shani by aspect is really powerful. In fact, it's sometimes more difficult because you're just bearing it, and he's not in that place where he's taking action. Like Saturn is in Libra, so planets in Libra are going to be empowered to act. But planets in Sagittarius are just feeling the impact. They're just feeling that kind of pressure. And there are stories about Shani's drishti, like that's what cut off Lord Ganesha's head. That kind of, so his glimpse is hard to bear, or his glance is hard to bear. So the planet in aspect by transit is also really important. So I think I sometimes think more is made out of Sadhisati than needs to be at times. I think when Saturn's right over the moon, in particular, that one, when it's on the moon, is definitely more difficult than the before and the after. But I think any Saturn influenced by transit is really the ones that are quite difficult. And we always have to look at where Saturn is in anyone's natal chart, and it should probably be a little bit of the reading, because they're going to be feeling that pressure even if there's not a planet there. It's probably aspecting something or influencing something anyway. And it's certainly in one of their houses. It's in a house from the Lagna and from the moon. So there's always a reckoning with that, how time is pressuring us at that moment.
What I'll often do when I look at Sadhisati influences, I'll also look at what's called the Sarva Ashtaka Varga Bindus of a house. So if it has, especially if the bindus, the points are over 30, that Saturn's transiting over that sign that has 30 points, it's going to help it a little bit. It's going to help withstand some of the influence if there's negative influences coming, from Saturn. So there is some compensation by those Sarva Ashtaka Varga Bindus.
Yeah, Prashna teaches that. Yeah. And then generally, a lot of astrologers watch out for when Shani is going into places with no bindus in its own Ashtaka Varga, because that can sometimes produce total collapse.
A zero?
In its own Ashtaka Varga, it doesn't have a lot of bindus anyway, but
right.
Places with zero, can be severe, yes.
Thank you. So we need to wrap up soon. So the last question.
We don't like working with people in crises, but how do you like working with people? What is an ideal sort of way to approach you and work with you? What works well?
I like anybody who's sincere and wants to work with you to try to discover what their chart's all about. It says again in Prashna Marga, you shouldn't do the chart as someone who's trying to test you or try to prove what you're saying is wrong or not right. That's not going to be a good relationship to get information to help that person. So if they're engaged with you, they're sincere, they want to help, and those can be enjoyable charts to do, because you're actually using astrology in one of its purposes is to find out what's the best actions I can take over time, and their willingness to at least listen, and then again they have to take the responsibility of taking action if they want to have something different. So if they have that readiness to change that I mentioned, and they're not, they're open to change, they're open to listening, that's a nice session to have.
Yeah, it's not necessarily don't like it because you don't like them or whatever. It's just not effective. Personally, I feel like it's wasting their time and it's not helping them. You really want to be able to help. It feels great to be able to help people. This is just a human thing. It's like the best thing going is that we can help somebody, for everybody. And you just don't feel like you're helping someone. It's like this is not getting through, And so, obviously, people that approach it like someone would approach you with the beautiful thing that that you can help them with like Bill said, with a sincere, with something that's realistic about what we're talking about, rather than fix me with this gem. Well, why do you think I got the reading? Like this. Sometimes you get these things that are just hard to work with. It's not because they're not nice people, but you can't help that sort of projection, that kind of transference. Like, well, you're an astrologer, you're supposed to fix it. People that want to just be realistic about it, and also that want to have the proper amount of responsibility and realize that it's their karma. That it's like, well, God, I didn't get a reading so that you could tell me it was all my fault. It's like, well, it's not like saying it's their fault, but I mean, these are your actions. And so realizing that, it's a real joy to work with people that are also ready to hear and accept the path that they've actually opened up with you, which is, I want to have some insight and a sort of, higher sort of altitude look at my life, because I'm kind of like my nose up against the painting. I can't really see it very well. So I want to zoom out and have this astrological view of it. What does it look like? Because the astrologer's job is really to just read what they see. It's really to just interpret what they see and then try to give that larger perspective and hopefully hold some wisdom that can help the person make a better choice and understand themselves better in the future. So, you just want to be able to help people. And it's painful when you want to help them and you can't because of their crisis or because of their, maybe the word is immaturity, just not being realistic about what you can do for them.
I had a client who said to me one time, Bill, I've been going to you for 6 years now, and you keep telling me the same thing. Then she said, why do you do that? And I said, I'll keep telling you the same thing until you listen. And then she wrote me back this nicest letter that just that awakening that, maybe I should listen a little bit more. It just changed everything for her, But it took her 6 years to, open up her hearing. But she was still willing to be engaged, but it wasn't happening the way she was hoping because she wasn't, listening to anything.
I actually usually won't do a reading after people have to wait a year or two. They'll say, I'm going to get another reading. I'll say, just do what I told you in the last one.
Right. Save yourself some.
Really, I feel really responsible that I really feel like I want to be helping the person. I don't want to take their money. If I don't feel like I helped them, I'll just donate the money. I actually just don't want it. And I found that if I feel like it's going to be that kind of energy, it's not because I'm mad at them or I don't like them. It's just I'd rather them do what I told you last year. Because I'll look at the chart and say, I'll look and see if they're having something really, really difficult, but often it's not. It's like, remember what last year, do that. Yeah.
The traditional way of doing this, perhaps, is you're supposed to look at, you get the person's chart information, then you look to see what is going to happen to you as the astrologer by doing the reading for that person.
Okay, explain what that means. You just scared all of us.
No, there's some rules and all that. You have to look at a certain place, see this and that, and then you see basically, what will be the outcome of counseling that person. And, really speaking, if you see that it's just going to be chaos, you should really refer the person to somebody else.
Yeah, I've totally.
This is the traditional, correct way of going about things.
What do you look at?
Oh, these are all the secrets.
I'll have to set up.
I've totally looked at someone's chart and know that it would be a hard interaction with the person. There's definitely markers, like if someone's got their, Mars on your Saturn, or certain things that are like if I can just tell when the energy is going to be really difficult with me and another person, and I'm not the one to help them.
Like you look at somebody's chart and there's a predominant, situation going on, that's when you would start unraveling their karmic path, so to speak. Is that how that might work, perhaps, with someone?
Not exactly.
If you're suggesting remedies, would you suggest that for a specific thing, there would be this thing that stands out in their chart, perhaps? Is that how that works?
What you can do is if you can see that, you look at the thing and you see that the person at the moment they can't listen and all that. Maybe they listen a little bit. So then you have to get hold of that little bit and try to give them some very simple something, and then they can come back in a month's time.
And you also have to know yourself as an astrologer and how you work. This is really a big part of it because we all don't do well with everybody. We all have a style. Everyone has a certain style. We were talking the other night up there. It's one of the women who were here, and she was actually asking me a thing about readings and like the way I do them. It wouldn't be the same for her because she's got a totally different style. But you also have to know what you bring, and if you're sincere in what you put out there in the world and you are out there enough, you'll have the clients that come to you. You will attract the ones that you can help, especially if you actually put that intention out, you know. Bring the ones to me that I can help and then let me help them. That was my simple intention for years when I put an emphasis on readings. And then the ones that you can't help will be like, they'll jump out at you like, it won't be hard to see them. That's just my approach. Other people are probably a lot more open, but just knowing yourself as an astrologer and knowing that maybe you just can't help everybody, and not like the refusal to do a reading means that they're a bad person or anything, but it's just like this person needs to be with someone else. Like, I'm not really good at babying people too much in readings and stuff. That's just not my style. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just not my style. So they're better with someone who's like, oh, well, you know, and that kind of thing. They're better with someone who, you know, who is really good at that. So
it's karma. I totally agree with Sam. I mean, you know, it's birds of a feather flock together. So, you know, why is it that, you know, we go to a conference and some people line up over there and some people line up over there, and, you know, it's just, there's something, you just see somebody and you think that's the person I want to have a reading with.
Especially if you do a lot of sadhana, like we were talking about, like if you don't actually do like prayer, you know, sadhana and this kind of stuff, you're not going to get clients to begin with. And if you're doing that, then, you know, the Devi, the divine forces are going to bring you the clients that you can help. It's just kind of how it works on some level. And the ones that show up that don't, you can see it right away. It's like, you know what, maybe this is better here.
So you start off the session by looking at their chart and you go, oh my God.
All those planets in the 6th house and a Virgo Lagna? I don't think so.
Oh my God.
I mean, the thing...
Mars, Moon in the 6th.
The thing is that, you know, the astrologer's Jupiter, basically. So, you know, if you have some affliction to Jupiter, there is always a risk that you'll consult people who will just give you bad advice. I mean, there is the risk, you know. Why did you go to that man who knows nothing or basically told you stupid things?
And there are markers.
I mean, you know, it just happens. You know, there has to be like that. It's not.
And there are markers in someone's chart. Like, I actually pulled up a chart in the class today of the guy who went into that movie theater and shot up a bunch of people. He had that Jupiter-Rahu conjunction, the Guru Chandala Yoga. And this is I mean, one of the things that happens with that is if you have it, don't get upset, because that's not the only thing. But one of the difficulties, the reason it's problematic is because Jupiter's where we recognize a good teaching, where we'll recognize wisdom when we hear it or someone speaks to us. So an astrologer can actually give them like like a good teaching, whatever, and the Guru Chandala, the person maybe won't hear it. They'll just keep arguing and just keep trying to find problem. And you know this is problematic. Like when you see that someone has that. Actually, I've had many clients that have it, so it's not just one thing. But this is like a symptom of something where it could be hard to do a reading with someone who has that, as an example.
Which is their karma if it's with Jupiter, right?
Right, and it's your karma, and well, it's all that.
But also, you know, if you have Guru Chandala, then you will be looking for for example, an astrologer who has strong Rahu.
Right.
You know, Rahu's predominant, Rahu Avmakaric, or Rahu in the Lagna, or Rahu, something. Because you'll feel that that's the person who's going to advise you. So you know, it's just karma. And there's nothing actually inherently wrong. I mean, the person will give you good advice.
I have a couple of students that have that Guru Chandala, and it really can lead to a lot of good things, but there has to be certain things in place too, otherwise it can be just...
Yeah, you have quite a dance over it.
There has to be some
intelligence. Different people have to do different service to different people. I mean, it's just,
Yeah. Can I just say one thing about tomorrow's class really quick? I gave you all papers today. Bring them if you're coming to the class tomorrow, because I'm not going to be handing them out again. Just wanted I don't know if I made that clear today.
Thank you. So can I have